Tigrosa helluo is one of the most widespread and recognizable wolf spiders in eastern and central North America. It doesn't build a web to catch its prey. Instead, it relies on speed, stealth, and sharp instincts. In this overview, we'll examine its biology, behavior, habitat, and role in the ecosystem. From its taxonomic history to its hunting strategies and physical characteristics, this is a closer look at Tigrosa helluo. Tigrosa helluo is a large and formidable species of wolf spider, native to eastern and central North America. It's commonly encountered in a wide variety of habitats, from open fields and forest floors to wetlands and dense leaf litter. Unlike web-building spiders, Tigrosa helluo relies entirely on speed and stealth. As a fast ground-hunting predator, it chases down its prey with precision and power, making it a vital part of the ecosystem as a natural pest controller. This species plays a key ecological role by helping regulate insect populations, and is one of the most commonly spotted wolf spiders in its range due to its size and active hunting behavior. Tigrosa helluo was first described in 1837 by French arachnologist Charles Athanase Walkenaer. At the time, it was named Lycosa helluo, placing it in the same genus as many other large wolf spiders. The species name helluo is Latin for glutton, a fitting description for this spider's aggressive feeding habits and rather voracious appetite. Since then, its classification has evolved, but its reputation as a bold, efficient predator remains unchanged. The taxonomic history of Tigrosa helluo spans nearly 2 centuries of arachnological study. Like I mentioned earlier, it was placed in the genus Lycosa, giving it the original name Lycosa helluo. This genus at the time was a catch-all for many large wolf spiders. By the mid-1900s, anatomical research led to its reassignment to the genus Hogna, a group characterized by similarities in eye arrangement and body structure. However, a major revision came in 2012 when arachnologist Alan R. Brady published a comprehensive review of North American wolf spiders. Based on both morphological features and evolutionary relationships, he established a new genus, Tigrosa. Brady's work highlighted a distinct clade of large, boldly patterned wolf spiders endemic to North America. These spiders, including helluo, differed enough from their previous classifications to warrant their own genus. Today, the species formally is recognized as Tigrosa helluo, honoring both its original description and its modern taxonomic placement. Tigrosa helluo can be found throughout the eastern and central United States, and parts of southeastern Canada. In the United States, the original described range included states of Minnesota, Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, Missouri, Louisiana, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, Maryland, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. The current observations from iNaturalist include all of those, plus Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, South Dakota, Colorado, and even a small population has been introduced in California. Its preferred habitat includes leaf litter, under logs, grasslands, and human-altered environments like gardens and sheds. It's particularly common in moist, shaded areas where it can remain concealed during the day and hunt freely at night. But it will take on any environment available. Alrighty, so we're going to go ahead and jump into the identification section of the video now. These 5 illustrations that you see right in front of us are from Alan R. Brady's paper on distributing different species across Hogna and Alabacosa into the new genus Tigrosa. So these are all illustrations highlighting the characteristics that each species possesses. So we're going to go ahead and compare the other Tigrosa species to helluo. So helluo has a nice medial stripe, which is obviously on the carapace, which is like the head section of the spider that we know that has a very consistent presence throughout the carapace. Then moving on to the abdomen, we can see that it has the cardiac mark, which is in the anatomy of a spider, where the heart is roughly located inside of it. We can see it's a pretty nice oblong oval shape with 2 little dots on either side of them. And then we can see the chevrons, which are the little markings near the bottom of the abdomen there, round little rainbow looking shapes as they progress down the abdomen. So that is the characteristics of Tigrosa helluo. As we move on to Georgicola, we can see that same medial stripe, very similar looking cardiac mark, as well as the 2 dots on either side. Now the chevrons are the big difference here, as well as the body shape. The chevrons are a much sharper angle, and the carapace is a much broader and shorter version of a helluo carapace. So those are some differences there. Moving on to Aspersa, you can see the same medial stripe, although it seems to be cut off around the eye level, and that is true for Aspersa. This is not a mistake by the illustration by any means. Tigrosa aspersa has that medial stripe, but only for about 1/16 or 1/8 of the distance of maybe something like Georgicola, helluo, grandis, and anexa. It ends about right near the eyes and then doesn't exist anymore throughout the carapace. We can see that the cardiac mark is much more long and narrow in comparison and does not have dots on either side. We can see that the chevrons are in fact pretty similar to helluo, but they seem to be even a little bit sharper of an angle as well, just like Georgicola was. And then moving on to grandis, we can see that it does now, we return back to that full-length medial stripe, but now we can see an additional characteristic in the yellow blotches underneath the eyes and right above the chelicerae, which are the best identifying factor for grandis, for Tigrosa grandis. They are the most consistent thing that we found that separates them from the rest of the species inside of the genus. And then moving on to the abdomen, we can see that same cardiac mark, although it extends even through the chevrons, and the chevrons have dots on each end of the section as they progress down the abdomen. And now moving on to certainly an outlier of the entire genus, we have Tigrosa annexa, much smaller in size, much broader medial stripe. The cardiac mark is very similar and reminiscent of the other Tigrosa, but it has a large outline of white coloration around it, which distinctly represents anexa. So now moving on to the real life pictures rather than illustrations, this helps us look at the legs, which is another good identifying factor, as well as the colorations and being able to highlight those. So as we can just look at these five here, the big three in the middle, Georgicola, grandis, and aspersa, set themselves apart with those banded legs. It's a very beautiful trait and also a very distinct and vivid one. Now that we can see that helluo and anexa do not have that. So that's a good identifying factor, being able to separate yourself if you're Tigrosa, which is very distinctly identified by the yellow stripe going down the middle of the carapace. If your spider that you're trying to identify has those characteristics and does not have leg banding, then you're probably looking at a Tigrosa helluo or a Tigrosa anexa. And Tigrosa helluo are very identifiable in comparison to anexa because of its narrower medial stripe, usually golden in coloration, as well as the lack of a highlight around the cardiac mark, usually just the same or similar color to the rest of the abdomen, just with a faint outline and not the light coloration around it. And so now that we've kind of compared the real images to one another, there are also some differences even within the species. So when we're dealing with the spider like Tigrosa helluo, who has such a large range, we're bound to run into some differences in the characteristics. We can see here on the Tigrosa helluo on the right side, obviously pretty similar to the one on the left, not the illustration but the image. But the one in the middle is very distinctly different. You can notice a very light coloration as well as a more pronounced cardiac mark. We can almost see like a starburst pattern on the Tigrosa helluo in the middle. And as well as the Tigrosa helluo on the right and the left have different medial stripes as well. The one on the left has a more golden coloration, where the one on the right has more of a tan or a brown coloration. As well as the cardiac mark is also slightly more visible on the one on the right as well. So looking at differences between the species is important, but also within the species is important as well. So note the lack of leg banding on all of these individuals, as well as the somewhat consistent narrow medial strip as well. Alright, now that we've covered the dorsal side of Tigrosa helluo and how to differentiate it from similar species within the genus, we're going to go ahead and move on to the ventral side, which is the underneath of the spider, which can really show some incredible characteristics, as we can see here from these illustrations, which really highlights and pronounces these characteristics. Now, let's go ahead and start with helluo like we did last time. We can see on the far left that it's a very similar coloration throughout, as well as those speckling, those little polka dots delicately placed around in the abdomen. We can see that the middle is slightly more pale than the exterior is, but it's around the same uniform coloration. It's a pretty basic ventral compared to some of these other ones. Moving on to the right, we can see that the Georgicola has an incredibly beautiful ventral. We can see those three lines converging. Those converging stripes is the best identifying factor for Georgicola. It is only present on Tigrosa georgicola, so we can also see those polka dots and speckling outside of those converging lines as well. So it's a really unique and amazing ventral coloration. We can also see on the Tigrosa aspersa on the right of that, we can see that there is a consistent black stripe going through the epigyne, which is the female reproductive organs, going down to the spinnerets as well. It almost has like a wishbone structure at the top where they kind of separate and fork out into two ways. And then we can see below that a bunch of patches of little black sections as well. Not particularly any shape like a circle, more or less just little black blotches of black throughout the ventral of the Tigrosa aspersum. Now moving on to grandis, we can see there's almost like a grid pattern in the middle of a Tigrosa grandis ventral. We can have like a very isolated section of that. And then outside of that, it grows much darker with small little patches of black shapes around that section. Overall, pretty basic ventral. Moving on to the Tigrosa annexa, we can see that this is even more basic than the helluo's ventral. We can see the very basic flat coloration just with polka dots on the underneath, and there is no other patterning, no other really coloration changes, just very basic polka dots with a light pale color underneath. So now that we've looked at the illustration side of it, we're going to go ahead and compare within the species. So these, all three individuals are all Tigrosa helluo. They're all around the same area. We're in the central United States. So the one on the left has a very pale ventral. As we can see, the abdomen is a very pale coloration overall with small little polka dots in the middle of the abdomen. Moving on to the one on the right, we can see it's much more like a darker caramel coloration with the similar polka dot pattern. And the one next to that is even darker, with it almost being like a flat brown coloration, but you can still see those polka dots. So the patterning is similar throughout, it's just the color will vary depending on the location and the genetics of the spider, but the pattern will always be the same as long as you're kind of in this range of pale to dark coloration. As long as you're having that same pattern, then you're right on track to find and identify a Tigrosa helluo. Alright, so now that we've covered both the adult female ventral and dorsal sides, we're going to go and move on to the mature males. Now, from these four photos here, with the one illustration on the left-hand side and the three photos, we can clearly see that there is a more uniform pattern or coloration overall with the mature males. So these three images here were captured in a wide range, so these were not in a specific state or region, these were all across the United States. And so you can clearly see how much more uniform the colorations, the patternings are across these three real individuals, and then of course the illustration on the far left. The males display an overall tan coloration with their very distinct medial stripe that's uniform across the three individuals. You can also see that the cardiac mark is the exact same throughout the three individuals. The only real difference that I can see is somewhat the chevrons are slightly different. The one in the middle has very faint chevrons, almost non-existent, where the ones on the left and then also the right side are a little bit more present, but this is just due to genetic variations and can even occur in the same population. Compared to the adult females, we can clearly see that there's more uniform coloration throughout the individuals of Tigrosa helluo adult males. Alright, so we're going to move on to the ventral side of the adult males. Now on the far left I have the female Tigrosa helluo diagram illustration from Alan R. Brady's research paper for example to compare them from the females to the males. Overall their patterning is quite similar. I would say that in those three images, those photographs of the ventral side of Tigrosa helluo, it's going to be less polka dotted overall. It's going to be a little bit less sparse, and it's mainly just going to be a flat, pale coloration, very uniform. I will also say a difference between the male and the females is that the sternum, which is the center piece of their carapace, and then also the coxa, which are the first segmentations of the leg starting at the carapace, are much more light in coloration than the females are. So you'll see that all of these three, coxa and sternum, are light pale colored, but all of the females that we covered in the previous slides were all dark or black in coloration. But the ventral side for males is super similar across the board to each other. These are individuals that were found quite a bit of ways from one another in different states and such. So again, the males are significantly more uniform than the females are, which is very helpful for trying to identify them. Alright, so now that we've covered both the adult male and adult female stages, we're going to swiftly move on to cover the Tigrosa helluo juveniles. This is going to be a more brief section than the adult versions were, but let's just go ahead and jump into this. So as you can see on the far right here, we have the very vibrant looking Tigrosa helluo juvenile. Now the only really big distinct difference is that its overall coloration is more of like a green color, which is very unique. Not something that we've quite covered yet, but this is something that's common really amongst Tigrosa as a whole, especially in their juvenile stages. So you'll notice that some of the colorations can have a slight green tinge. This is particularly noticeable in the right two images. You can see the very distinct lighter coloration, but other than that, the patterns are very similar to the adult female variants. The medial stripe is very similar. The overall carapace markings are very similar. There is some variation in the abdominal characteristics. You can see that the cardiac mark is a little bit more jagged, especially on that right individual, but those are very small variables that will probably disappear with age. But you can still use your method of characteristic subtraction. So we obviously can see that this medial stripe is very narrow and thin. There's no banding on the legs, as we can clearly see. And so this is very likely to be Tigrosa helluo, just based off of those two characteristics alone. Of course, these are all been confirmed as Tigrosa helluo, but just from going at a glance, we can clearly see that. But then the other ones on the left side are much more dark in coloration. As you can see, they much more resemble adult females. In fact, the one on the far left is actually a juvenile male, which is pretty interesting. And so they vastly changed their colorations going into maturity, at least for males. But females will kind of maintain those characteristics going into adulthood. But yeah, it's a pretty basic section. It's a lot of what we already covered, but there's just some slight variations. Alright, so now we are going to move on to our final section, which are the Tigrosa helluo spiderlings. Now we're going to jump straight into this. As you can see, especially on the middle and far left images, we can kind of clearly see those distinct dorsal patternings, especially on the abdomen. Usually the individual will grow into the more unique characteristics, especially on the carapace, and then some minor changes on the abdomen. But as you can see, the comparison between a few individuals and their abdominal patternings, and most of them are uniform. They will start uniform as individuals, and then they will grow into their more unique characteristics with slight variation to their chevrons, their cardiac marks, stuff like that. There isn't much to cover here other than just looking out for the same characteristics that we've been talking about throughout the video, just on a much smaller scale, and usually more uniform within a population, not much variation throughout. Whether encountered in a forest, backyard, or beneath a pile of leaves, Tigrosa helluo plays an important role in maintaining the ecological balance. Its adaptability, hunting efficiency, and striking appearance make it a standout among North American spiders. Understanding species like this helps us appreciate the complexity of the ecosystems that they support. Thanks for joining us in exploring the life and legacy of Tigrosa helluo.